stop right there. How long have you been here? Does anyone know you in this area?
I've been coming here for 45 years. This is my city. This is my beach.
Prove your citizenship right now, or we're taking you into custody.
You're federal agents. You should know exactly what you're doing right now.
Stay quiet and put your hands behind your back.
Sure, go ahead. But that camera's watching everything. In this moment...
The security camera from the beachfront hotel would later show exactly what happened that Saturday morning at 7:23 a.m. on Clearwater Beach, Florida. A black man in his early 50s stood knee-deep in the surf, casting a fishing line into the calm Gulf waters. He wore board shorts, a faded University of Florida t-shirt, and a well-worn fishing hat. Everything about him suggested a local enjoying a quiet morning before the crowds arrived. Federal agents Marcus Webb and Jennifer Kowalski spotted him from the parking lot, and something in their expressions changed. They started walking toward him with purpose, badges already in hand. What these agents didn't know was that they had just made the worst mistake of their entire careers. One decision that would cost them their jobs, trigger a federal civil rights investigation, and result in the largest settlement for wrongful detention in U.S. Customs and Border Protection history. The hotel cameras were recording everything. Multiple beachgoers would pull out their phones within minutes, and these two agents were about to destroy everything they had worked for while teaching a lesson that would echo through every CBP training academy in the country. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or state in the comments below. And if you're new here, please hit that subscribe button. This story gets even more intense, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Dr. Marcus Chen had been a marine biologist for 27 years. Before that, he spent 6 years in the U.S. Navy as a submarine officer, serving 2 deployments in the Pacific. He had a Ph.D. in marine ecology from the University of Miami, had published over 90 peer-reviewed papers on coastal ecosystems, and currently directed the Marine Science Institute at the University of South Florida. He had briefed members of Congress on ocean conservation. He had testified before the EPA. He had worked with NOAA on federal policy for the past decade. He knew federal law inside and out, particularly environmental regulations and maritime jurisdiction. He knew his rights better than most lawyers, and he definitely knew when those rights were being violated. That morning, Marcus had one simple goal: catch his breakfast before heading to the lab. He had woken up at 5:30 a.m., driven 10 minutes from his house in Dunedin to his favorite spot on Clearwater Beach, and set up his gear just as the sun was rising. He had been fishing these same waters since he was 8 years old, when his father first taught him to cast. Simple, peaceful, forgettable. Just a man in the ocean, like thousands of other Saturday mornings in his life. What he didn't know was that this particular morning would become evidence in a federal lawsuit and spark nationwide outrage about racial profiling by Border Patrol agents operating hundreds of miles from any actual border. Agents Webb and Kowalski approached Marcus from behind. They didn't greet him. They didn't introduce themselves properly. Webb, a 12-year veteran of CBP, simply called out, "Excuse me, sir, we need to speak with you." Marcus turned, surprised. He was the only person on this stretch of beach. The nearest other person was maybe 200 yards away, walking a dog. He reeled in his line and waded toward the shore. "Morning," he said. "What can I help you with?" Webb and Kowalski stood at the waterline, both wearing plain clothes but with badges clearly visible on their belts. Webb had his hand resting near his weapon, a detail Marcus noticed immediately. That hand position meant this wasn't a friendly conversation. "Can I see some identification?" Webb asked. Marcus paused. "Identification for what? I'm fishing on a public beach. I need to verify your status," Webb said, his voice clipped and cold. "My status?" Marcus asked. "I don't understand what you're asking me." "Your immigration status," Kowalski said, stepping forward slightly. "We need to see proof of citizenship or a visa." The question hung in the air like an accusation. The meaning was crystal clear and absolutely disgusting. Marcus looked at them both carefully. He had dealt with difficult situations throughout his career. He had negotiated with hostile foreign officials over research permits. He had handled funding disputes with federal agencies. But standing in the surf while federal agents questioned whether he belonged in the country where he was born was different. He stayed calm and asked the obvious question. "On what grounds are you asking for my papers?" Webb's jaw tightened. "We have the authority to question anyone within 100 miles of a border." "This is the Gulf of Mexico," Marcus said evenly. "Not a land border. And even if it were, you still need reasonable suspicion to detain someone." Around them, early morning beachgoers were starting to notice. A woman jogging by slowed down, watching the interaction. An elderly white man set up his fishing gear 50 yards away without a second glance from the agents. A group of 3 white college-aged kids walked past carrying surfboards, and Webb didn't even turn his head. Marcus noticed all of this. He had trained himself to notice everything. It was part of how he conducted field research, observing patterns that others missed. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time," Webb said, his voice rising slightly. "Do you have identification with you?" Marcus reached slowly into the waterproof bag clipped to his belt. He pulled out his wallet and handed Webb his driver's license. Webb studied it for a long time, much longer than necessary. He showed it to Kowalski, who also examined it closely. "This says you were born in Florida," Webb said, as if this fact itself was suspicious. "That's correct," Marcus said. "Tallahassee. Tallahassee Memorial Hospital, March 15, 1973. How long have you lived in Florida?" "My entire life, except for 6 years in the Navy and 4 years of graduate school." Webb handed the license back, but his expression hadn't softened. "What are you doing here?" "Fishing," Marcus said, gesturing to his rod and the bucket beside him with 2 small redfish. "Same thing I've been doing on this beach for 45 years. Then Webb asked the question that told Marcus everything he needed to know about why he had been approached. "Are you sure you're supposed to be in this area?" The implication was crystal clear. This wasn't about immigration status or border security. This was about a black man standing on a beach in a predominantly white area, and 2 federal agents who had decided that required investigation. Marcus took a slow breath. "Am I being detained, or am I free to go?" "We're conducting an investigation," Kowalski said. "That's not an answer to my question," Marcus replied calmly. "Under the 4th Amendment, I have the right to know if I'm being detained. If I'm not being detained, I'm going to continue fishing. If I am being detained, I need to know the specific reasonable suspicion that justifies the detention." Webb's face flushed. "We don't have to explain our authority to you." "Actually, you do," Marcus said. "That's literally how constitutional law works." The tension was building. The woman who had been jogging pulled out her phone and started recording from about 30 feet away. She had stopped pretending to stretch and was openly filming the interaction. Webb noticed the phone and seemed to become more aggressive. "Put your hands where I can see them," he ordered. Marcus's hands were already visible, hanging loosely at his sides. He raised them slightly, palms out. "My hands have been visible this entire time." "We need to search your bag," Kowalski said, pointing to the waterproof bag at Marcus's waist and the larger tackle box sitting on the sand. "I do not consent to a search of my belongings," Marcus stated clearly. "You don't have probable cause, and I'm explicitly refusing consent." Webb ignored him. He grabbed the tackle box and opened it. Inside were fishing lures, extra line, a fillet knife, hooks, and a measuring tape. He dumped the contents onto the sand, scattering Marcus's gear across the beach. He examined each item as if looking for contraband. Kowalski reached for the waterproof bag at Marcus's waist. Marcus took a step back. "I've explicitly stated I do not consent to this search. What you're doing right now is a violation of my 4th Amendment rights. Sir, if you don't cooperate, we will place you under arrest," Webb said. "For what crime?" Marcus asked. His voice was still calm, but there was steel in it now. "Obstruction of a federal investigation. I've answered every question you've asked. I've provided identification. I've clearly stated my rights. That's not obstruction. That's exercising constitutional protections that you, as federal agents, swore an oath to uphold. Type unfair in the comments if you think this situation is already out of control." More people were watching now. The woman was still recording. A man walking his dog had stopped to watch. 2 teenagers on skateboards had paused on the boardwalk. Phones started coming out. Webb and Kowalski were creating a public spectacle, and every second of it was being documented from multiple angles. This was Webb's second massive mistake, and the consequences were already piling up. Marcus pulled out his own phone and started recording. The moment his camera came out, Webb's demeanor changed entirely. His voice got louder, more aggressive. "You need to put that phone away right now. I have the right to record federal agents performing their duties in a public space," Marcus said calmly. This was established in numerous federal court cases, including Glick v. Cuniff and Turner v. Driver. "Sir, if you don't put that phone away, you will be arrested. Then you'll be adding another federal civil rights violation to the list," Marcus said. His hand was steady. His camera was capturing both agents' faces clearly. Kowalski grabbed Marcus's wrist, the one holding the phone. "I said put it down." Marcus didn't resist, but he didn't lower the phone either. "You're now making physical contact with me without legal justification. I want your badge numbers, both of you, right now." Webb stepped very close to Marcus, invading his personal space. "You're coming with us for questioning." "On what legal grounds?" Marcus asked. "Suspected immigration violation. I'm a U.S. citizen. I was born in Florida. I showed you my driver's license, which you examined and returned. There is no reasonable suspicion of an immigration violation. We'll let a judge decide that," Webb said. He pulled out handcuffs. The crowd of witnesses had grown to at least 10 people now. Several were recording. The woman who had started filming first called out, "He hasn't done anything wrong. You're harassing him." Webb ignored her. He grabbed Marcus's arm and began to force it behind his back. Marcus didn't resist physically, but he spoke clearly for the cameras. "I am not resisting. I am complying under protest. This detention is unlawful, and I will be filing a formal complaint with CBP Internal Affairs and the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division." Webb snapped one cuff onto Marcus's wrist, then the other. Marcus stood there, hands cuffed behind his back, his fishing rod lying in the surf, his tackle box contents scattered across the sand, surrounded by a growing crowd of witnesses recording everything. He had just been arrested for fishing while black on a public beach by federal agents who would soon learn exactly how catastrophically they had miscalculated. Webb called their supervisor on his radio. What he reported was a carefully crafted fiction. "We have detained a subject who refused to provide documentation and became aggressive when questioned about his status, requesting transport for processing." Anyone listening to the recordings later, and many people would, could hear that this was completely false. Marcus had provided documentation. He had remained calm throughout. His only aggression was knowing and asserting his constitutional rights. A CBP supervisor named Daniel Ortiz arrived within 20 minutes. He pulled up in an unmarked SUV and approached the scene, where Marcus now sat on the sand in handcuffs while Webb and Kowalski stood nearby, looking increasingly uncomfortable as the crowd of witnesses continued to grow. Ortiz assessed the situation immediately. He was a 22-year veteran and had seen problem stops before. He walked over to Webb first. "Walk me through this." Webb explained that they had approached a suspicious individual who couldn't adequately explain his presence in the area and refused to cooperate with their investigation. Ortiz looked at the crowd of phone cameras pointed at them. He looked at Marcus, sitting calmly in handcuffs, his fishing gear scattered around. He looked at the other white fisherman on the beach who hadn't been approached. His expression shifted. "Did he provide ID when you asked?" "He provided a Florida driver's license," Webb admitted. "Did it match his physical description?" "Yes." "Did he tell you he was a U.S. citizen?" "He claimed to be born in Florida." "Did you have any specific intelligence or reasonable suspicion that his documents were fraudulent?" Webb hesitated. "No, but..." "Did he resist when you attempted to search his belongings?" "He refused to consent to the search." "That's not resistance," Ortiz said quietly. "That's exercising his rights." "Did he become physically aggressive at any point?" "No, but he was recording us and citing case law." "So he knows his rights," Ortiz interrupted. He walked over to Marcus. "Sir, I'm Supervisory Agent Daniel Ortiz. Can you tell me what happened here?" Marcus looked up at him. "I was fishing. I've been fishing on this beach since I was a child. These agents approached me without cause, demanded proof of citizenship despite my being a natural-born citizen fishing on a public beach, ignored my assertion of Fourth Amendment rights, conducted an illegal search of my belongings without consent or probable cause, and then arrested me for obstruction when I documented their violation of my civil rights." His voice was measured, precise, and completely professional. This was clearly someone with extensive experience in high-pressure situations. Ortiz turned to Kowalski. "Did he give you this explanation of events in this level of detail?" "He talks like a lawyer," Kowalski muttered. "Did you ask him what he does for a living?" Silence. "Did you ask him anything beyond demanding his papers?" More silence. "Do you think these agents actually believed they were doing their jobs correctly, or did they know they were profiling someone? Let me know in the comments." Ortiz looked at Marcus again. "Sir, may I ask what you do professionally?" "I'm a marine biologist. I direct the Marine Science Institute at the University of South Florida. I have a PhD in marine ecology. Before that, I served 6 years as an officer in the U.S. Navy. I've lived in Florida my entire life except for military service and graduate school, which I attended at the University of Miami. I own a home in Dunedin, about 3 miles from here. I pay taxes, I vote, and I fish on this beach most Saturday mornings, which anyone who actually patrols this area regularly would probably know." The color drained from Webb's face. Kowalski looked like she might be sick. Ortiz's jaw tightened. "Remove the handcuffs right now." "Sir, we were following protocol," Webb started. "That wasn't a request," Ortiz said, his voice sharp enough to cut. "Remove them immediately." Webb uncuffed Marcus with shaking hands. The moment the cuffs came off, Marcus rubbed his wrists but didn't make a dramatic show of it. He simply stood, brushed the sand off his shorts, and looked at Ortiz. "I want the names and badge numbers of both agents," Marcus said calmly. "I want the incident report number. I want the contact information for your Office of Professional Responsibility. And I want copies of all body camera and dashboard camera footage from this incident, which I am requesting right now under the Freedom of Information Act. Ortiz nodded. You'll have all of that. Sir, I apologize. An apology doesn't undo a false arrest, Marcus said. It doesn't undo the violation of my constitutional rights. It doesn't undo the fact that I was handcuffed on a public beach for the crime of fishing while black. What it does is demonstrate that you understand these agents acted unlawfully. He pulled out a business card from his wallet and handed it to Ortiz. The card read, Dr. Marcus Chen, Ph.D., Director, Marine Science Institute, University of South Florida. It listed his office phone, email, and official university credentials. Ortiz looked at the card for a long moment. Then he looked at Webb and Kowalski. The expression on his face told them everything they needed to know about the trouble they were in. Dr. Chen, you have my word that this will be investigated thoroughly, Ortiz said. I don't want your word, Marcus replied. I want accountability. I've spent my entire professional career working with federal agencies on ocean policy. I've testified before Congress. I've briefed your parent agency, the Department of Homeland Security, on coastal environmental issues. I know exactly how government accountability works, and I know exactly how to ensure it happens. He picked up his fishing rod from the surf where it had been sitting for the past 30 minutes. He began collecting his tackle that Webb had dumped on the sand. The crowd of witnesses hadn't dispersed. Several people approached him. The woman who had first started recording came over. I got everything on video. All of it. If you need it, I'll testify. Thank you, Marcus said. I'd appreciate your contact information. 4 more witnesses volunteered the same. They gave Marcus their names, phone numbers, and emails. They airdropped him their videos on the spot. The evidence was overwhelming and distributed across multiple sources. Even if CBP wanted to bury this, they couldn't. Marcus took photos of his scattered equipment. He photographed the marks on his wrists from the handcuffs. He documented everything with the same meticulous attention to detail he brought to his research. Webb and Kowalski stood to the side, supervised by Ortiz, watching their careers disintegrate in real time. They had arrested a decorated Navy veteran, a distinguished scientist, a man who worked regularly with federal agencies, and a U.S. citizen who had lived in Florida his entire life. They had done so without cause, solely because he was black and fishing on a beach. And they had done it in front of cameras and witnesses who captured every moment of their misconduct. Their decision to demand papers from a man fishing peacefully had just destroyed everything they had worked for, and it was about to get much, much worse. The videos hit the internet within 2 hours. The woman who recorded first posted her footage to Twitter with a detailed explanation of what she witnessed. Federal agents just arrested a black man for fishing on Clearwater Beach. He was polite, knew his rights, and they cuffed him anyway. This is what racial profiling looks like. By that evening, the tweet had 400,000 views. By the next morning, it had 3 million. Local news picked up the story immediately. By Sunday afternoon, it was national news. A renowned marine biologist and Navy veteran illegally detained while fishing by CBP agents hundreds of miles from any border. The optics couldn't have been worse for Customs and Border Protection. CNN ran the story with the headline, Scientist Arrested While Fishing Raises Questions About CBP Overreach. MSNBC focused on the racial profiling angle. Fox News initially tried to defend the agents but quickly backed away when Dr. Chen's credentials became widely known. CBP's Public Affairs Office released a generic statement. We are aware of an incident involving 2 of our agents in the Tampa field office. The matter is under internal review. We take allegations of misconduct seriously and will investigate thoroughly. The public was not satisfied. Protesters gathered outside the Tampa CBP office demanding the agents' immediate termination. The ACLU announced they were monitoring the situation. The NAACP issued a statement calling for a federal civil rights investigation. Type accountability in the comments if you think these agents got exactly what they deserved. Dr. Chen released his own statement through the University of South Florida's communications office. It was measured and professional, exactly what you would expect from someone in his position. On Saturday morning, I was fishing on a beach I have visited since childhood when I was approached, questioned, illegally searched, and arrested by CBP agents without probable cause. I was targeted because of the color of my skin. As a scientist who has worked with federal agencies for decades, I understand that law enforcement has difficult jobs. But this was not a difficult situation. This was racial profiling, and it was a violation of my constitutional rights. If this can happen to someone with my resources and platform, what happens to ordinary citizens who don't have access to lawyers or media attention? That's why I'm pursuing this case, not for revenge, but for accountability. The statement resonated because Dr. Chen didn't perform outrage or demand punishment. He simply explained what happened and why it mattered beyond his individual experience. Then the digging began. Journalists and internet investigators started examining Webb and Kowalski's records. What they found was disturbing. Webb had 14 previous complaints filed against him over his 12-year career. 11 involved stops of Black or Latino individuals. 8 occurred in areas with no legitimate border enforcement justification. The complaints described remarkably similar patterns: aggressive approach, demands for papers without cause, searches without consent, and arrests when people asserted their rights. Kowalski had 7 complaints over 8 years. 5 involved similar racial dynamics. Both agents had been through supplemental training multiple times. Both had been counseled by supervisors. Neither had ever faced serious discipline. More victims started coming forward. Once the news broke, people who had been stopped, harassed, or detained by these same agents found their voices. A Cuban-American woman described being stopped while leaving a grocery store and forced to prove her citizenship despite being born in Miami. A Puerto Rican man, Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens by birth, described being detained for 2 hours because Webb insisted his driver's license looked suspicious. A Black college student from Georgia described being pulled over while driving through Florida and questioned extensively about where she was going and why. 12 people came forward over the next week, all people of color, all stopped without legitimate cause, all by the same 2 agents. The pattern was undeniable. CBP had failed to address it, and that failure had allowed Webb and Kowalski to continue their behavior until they finally targeted someone who couldn't be ignored or intimidated. Dr. Chen didn't want to become a public crusader, but he knew this case was bigger than his own experience. He hired one of the top civil rights attorneys in Florida, Sandra Martinez, who had successfully litigated multiple cases against federal agencies. Martinez filed 2 separate actions. First, a formal civil rights complaint with the Department of Justice. Second, a federal lawsuit against Webb, Kowalski, CBP, and the Department of Homeland Security under 42 U.S.C. SEFR 1983 for violation of Fourth Amendment rights, along with claims of racial profiling, false arrest, illegal search, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The lawsuit detailed everything: the illegal stop, the demand for papers without reasonable suspicion, the search without consent, the false arrest, the physical handcuffing, and the pattern of similar behavior by both agents against other people of color. It also included something powerful: Dr. Chen's professional reputation and the damage to his ability to work with federal agencies. As someone who regularly collaborated with NOAA, EPA, and other government departments, being falsely arrested by federal agents created professional complications that would follow him for years. The lawsuit demanded $25 million in damages. CBP's internal investigation moved quickly, likely due to the intense public pressure and media scrutiny. Investigators interviewed all witnesses, reviewed body camera footage from both agents, examined the witness videos, and looked at the complete employment history of Webb and Kowalski. The body camera footage was damning. From the very first moment of contact, there was no legitimate law enforcement purpose. Webb's questions were not about immigration status verification. They were about a Black man's right to exist in that space. The footage captured Webb dumping the tackle box, Kowalski grabbing Dr. Chen's wrist, and the false information Webb radioed to his supervisor. Legal experts who reviewed the footage were unanimous. These agents had violated clearly established constitutional rights. The stop lacked reasonable suspicion. The search violated the Fourth Amendment. The arrest lacked probable cause. Any first-year law student could identify the violations. If you've made it this far, you're part of the solution. Subscribe and share this story so others can learn from it. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division opened a formal investigation 3 months after the incident. They weren't just looking at this one stop. They wanted to know why CBP agents were conducting immigration enforcement operations on beaches in Florida, hundreds of miles from any border. They wanted to know why Webb and Kowalski had so many complaints without facing consequences. They wanted to examine CBP's training, supervision, and accountability mechanisms. 8 months after the incident, criminal charges were filed against both agents in federal court. Deprivation of rights under color of law, which is 18 U.S.C. Par 242, false arrest, and illegal search and seizure. Each count carried potential prison time. The trial took place 14 months after the beach incident. The courtroom was packed every day. The evidence was overwhelming. Body camera footage, witness videos, testimony from Dr. Chen, testimony from the other victims who had come forward, expert witnesses on constitutional law and proper arrest procedures, and statistical analysis showing the racial disparities in Webb and Kowalski's stop patterns. The defense tried to argue that the agents were following their training and acting in good faith to enforce immigration law. That argument collapsed when prosecutors showed that CBP's own training materials explicitly prohibited the kind of stop they had conducted. Agents need specific, articulable, reasonable suspicion, not just someone's race or presence in an area. The prosecution presented evidence that Webb had stopped Black and Latino individuals at 7 times the rate he stopped white individuals, despite the demographics of the area not supporting such a disparity. The defense tried to claim that Dr. Chen's refusal to consent to the search was obstruction. The judge shut that down immediately, instructing the jury that citizens have an absolute right to refuse consent to searches and that assertion of constitutional rights can never constitute obstruction. The jury deliberated for 5 hours, guilty on all counts, both agents. Webb's family sobbed in the courtroom. Kowalski sat frozen, staring straight ahead. The 2 agents who had spent years in federal law enforcement were now convicted felons. Sentencing came 6 weeks later. The judge acknowledged their years of service but emphasized that their betrayal of their oaths and systematic pattern of civil rights violations demanded serious consequences. Agent Marcus Webb, 18 months in federal prison, 3 years of supervised release, permanent prohibition from any law enforcement employment. Agent Jennifer Kowalski, 14 months in federal prison, 3 years of supervised release, permanent prohibition from any law enforcement employment. For 2 people who had built their entire identities around being federal agents, this represented the complete destruction of their lives as they knew them. Their pensions were gone, their careers were over, their reputations were destroyed forever, all because they saw a Black man fishing and decided that required investigation. Separately, the civil lawsuit against CBP and DHS went to trial. Dr. Chen's legal team presented evidence of the emotional distress, professional complications, and ongoing impact of being falsely arrested. They showed emails from federal agency partners questioning whether they could continue collaborating with someone who had been arrested, even though the arrest was unlawful. They documented the time Dr. Chen had to spend dealing with the legal case instead of his research. The jury found in Dr. Chen's favor. The damages: $3.9 million in compensatory damages, $25 million in punitive damages, for a total of $28.9 million. $28.9 million for stopping a man who was fishing on a beach. But it was never really about the money. It was about sending a message that racial profiling carries real consequences, that civil rights violations will not be tolerated, and that no one is above the law. Webb and Kowalski were both fired from CBP before their criminal sentencing. Their law enforcement certifications were permanently revoked. They could never work as cops, border agents, security guards, or in any law enforcement capacity anywhere in the country. Webb was 44 years old and had spent his entire adult life in uniform. Kowalski was 37 and had joined CBP straight out of college. Now they would have to find new careers and explain to every potential employer why their names appeared in national news stories about racial profiling and civil rights violations. Their personal lives suffered too. Webb's marriage ended under the strain. Kowalski lost friendships with former colleagues who wanted nothing to do with the scandal. Both had to move to different states to escape the recognition and stigma. But the consequences went far beyond 2 individual agents. The Department of Justice investigation resulted in a consent decree placing the entire CBP Tampa field office under federal oversight for 5 years. The decree mandated complete revision of stop-and-question protocols, mandatory implicit bias training for all agents, new supervision requirements with regular review of agent activity, independent civilian oversight of complaint investigations, monthly statistical analysis of stops to identify racial disparities, body camera requirements for all field interactions, and early warning systems to flag problematic patterns before they escalate. 17 other CBP agents in the Tampa office were investigated based on information that emerged during Dr. Chen's case. 4 were fired, 6 were suspended, 3 were transferred to desk duties. The office's entire leadership was replaced. CBP director issued a national memo citing the case as an example of how not to conduct operations. The incident became required viewing in CBP training academies. Every new agent now watches the body camera footage and learns about constitutional limits on immigration enforcement. The case also influenced policy. CBP issued new guidance clarifying that agents cannot conduct immigration checks based solely on someone's appearance or presence in an area. They need specific, articulable facts suggesting an immigration violation. Simply being non-white in a public space is not reasonable suspicion. 3 supervisors who had reviewed Webb's and Kowalski's previous complaints without taking meaningful action also faced discipline. 1 was demoted, 2 were reassigned to positions without supervisory authority. CBP was making it clear that failure to address problem agents would carry consequences. Dr. Chen returned to his work at the Marine Science Institute. He didn't seek ongoing media attention or try to become a professional activist. He had research to conduct, students to mentor, and policy work to continue. He did exactly what he had been doing before 2 federal agents decided his skin color made him suspicious. But his case had an impact far beyond his personal experience. It became a landmark in civil rights law. It's now cited in lawsuits across the country involving racial profiling by federal agents. It's taught in law schools as an example of Fourth Amendment violations. It changed how CBP trains agents and how they're held accountable. Police departments and federal agencies throughout the country began re-examining their own practices. If a $28.9 million verdict could come from one unlawful beach stop, what were their own potential liabilities? The story of what happened on Clearwater Beach that Saturday morning is not just about 2 bad agents and 1 victim. It's about a systemic problem of racial profiling in law enforcement, the critical importance of accountability, and what happens when people refuse to accept injustice as normal. Dr. Marcus Chen never asked to become the face of this issue. He was simply fishing, doing what he had done since childhood, when he was targeted because 2 federal agents looked at him and saw a threat instead of a neighbor. But his experience became proof for the entire country that racial profiling happens to everyone: decorated veterans, distinguished scientists, people with PhDs and security clearances and decades of public service. If someone with Dr. Chen's credentials and resources wasn't safe from being handcuffed on a beach for no reason, then no one was truly protected. That reality is uncomfortable for many people to accept. It's easier to believe that police and federal agents only stop people who deserve it, that if you just comply, you'll be fine, that this doesn't happen to good people. Dr. Chen's case shattered all those comfortable myths. He was the most compliant person imaginable. He knew his rights and asserted them politely. He had done absolutely nothing wrong, and he was still arrested, handcuffed, and humiliated in public. If you ever find yourself in a similar situation, remember a few things. Document everything you can. Get witness names and contact information. Assert your rights clearly but without physical resistance. Say explicitly, "I do not consent to this search," or "Am I being detained or am I free to go?" Know that you have the right to record police in public, and understand that you're not just fighting for yourself, you're fighting for everyone who comes after you, everyone who might be targeted the same way. Webb and Kowalski made a choice that morning. They saw a black man fishing and decided he required investigation. They thought they had the power, and Dr. Chen had none. They thought they could violate his rights without consequences because they wore badges. They were catastrophically wrong, and that mistake cost them everything while teaching a lesson that echoed through every law enforcement agency in America. Racial profiling is not just morally wrong, it's illegal, it's expensive, and it will destroy your career. Justice isn't always swift or certain or guaranteed. But sometimes, when brave people refuse to be silent, when cameras capture the truth, when the evidence is overwhelming, and when officials are forced to act, justice does come. And that's exactly what happened here. Thank you for watching until the end. Make sure you're subscribed for more stories that matter, stories about accountability, justice, and people who refuse to accept injustice. What was the most shocking part of this story for you? Was it the $28.9 million verdict, the fact that these agents had 14 and 7 previous complaints, or that they actually thought they could arrest a marine biologist for fishing? Let me know in the comments below.